The Arab Spring was a series of revolutions within the Arab states that toppled long-standing autocracies. It started around 2011, and by mid-2012, it had mostly faded, except in one country, Syria, where the people would be caught in a conflict against their government for the next 14 years. Syria's woes did not start with the Arab Spring. It had been ruled under the iron grip of Assad's for the past 50 years, and that was a nightmare in itself. The Assads crushed dissent and rewarded loyalists, especially from their sect, the Alawites, a 10% minority that held all the strategic military and government positions. The first Syrian rebellion took place in 1982 against Hafez Al-Assad. It ended with a bloodbath. Reports say somewhere between 10 to 20,000 people lost their lives in what came to be known as the Hama massacre. This brutal measure ensured that no Syrian would think about speaking up again. When Hafez al-Assad died in 2000 and his son Bashar Al-Assad took over, Syrians hoped for a reformed government. But Assad was quick to follow in his father's footsteps. The climate of the country was always repressive. No one could openly criticize Assad and his loyalists. Despite being a 75% majority, the Sunni Muslims of Syria were treated inferior to the Alawites. Corruption was rampant, and every task, from education to jobs and housing, required a bribe to a loyalist. In the wake of the Arab Spring, when Syrians took to the streets for protests, they intended only peaceful demonstrations, but were arrested and tortured. Seeing this, protests spread like fire throughout the cities of Syria, calling for the release of demonstrators, political freedom, and dignity. These protests were met with open fire by the regime, which further escalated the conflict. As more protesters poured in, they were all met with the regime's merciless tactics: beat, harass, jail, and kidnap. After seeing such brutal steps taken against their own citizens, many army officers defected, and thus began the armed resistance against the Assad regime. Assad, like his father, opted for more violence, hoping this time too the Syrians could be hushed with bullets. Many towns were besieged with their food, water, and electricity cut off. No one was allowed in and out except for military trucks. Food ran short, and the Syrians were forced to survive on grass and leaves. When round-the-clock shelling left olive trees barren, many starved to death, including children. Others succumbed to injuries caused regularly due to the constant firing. But this did not break Syrians, so Assad resorted to chemical weapons. Many fled the country with only the clothes on their back, leaving their lands, business, and houses behind. And then came the winter. Without heating and warm clothes, Syrians were freezing to death. This was worse than being shot by bullets, and that's what Bashar wanted, to break them. International pressure grew on Assad to allow at least food supplies, but he put up humiliating conditions for the Syrians who were fighting a war for dignity. Assad was adamant, feeding his soldiers narratives that the uprisings were instigated by foreign forces. This further created the ground for Russia and Iran to embed their claws in the war-ridden country, on the pretext of security. It was with the aid of Russia and Iran that Assad could continue his brutal murder rampage for another decade. While Russia provided the Assad regime with air support in the form of indiscriminate aerial bombings in civilian areas, Iran gave the means to oppress Syrians in the form of troops, training, and weaponry. On a global level, Russia and China resisted any attempt at foreign intervention by using their veto power. Delusioned by propaganda, the Syrian army killed its citizens, painting them as terrorists. The world watched as the civil war kept going, and 500,000 Syrians lost their lives. Syrian infrastructure was devastated, the economy plummeted, and 90% were compelled to live below the poverty line. Syrians only found some respite when Russia was entangled in the war against Ukraine, and Iran was locked in growing tensions with Israel and the US after the Hamas attacks. On 8th December 2014, most of the rebels, united under the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, led by Ahmad Al Sharaa, launched a decisive attack against the weakened Assad regime, capturing Damascus and bringing an end to the reign of brutality. Almost every Syrian has lost someone close to this war. Share this video and let the world know their story of unimaginable pain but unbreakable resilience.